Creativity, it's the process that drives all of innovation. And yet, how do we go about it? And there are all different kinds of frameworks out there, different ways you can approach it. And this is one that happens to work for me. I've used it throughout my career, and I think it would be useful for you too. When we think about creativity, at the crux of it, creatives are considered to be crackpots. We're weirdos. And whether you're a hippie or a nerd or whatever, you're not just quite sane. That's the issue with creatives. There are a few basic ideas in this process, and that's one of them. You can't quite be even keeled. The other thing about creativity is not everybody is going to get it. You're introducing something they've never seen before, something that's uh, beyond a lot of people's comprehension, and so therefore you're not going to be adopted easily. There's going to be resistance to your idea. The other thing about something creative is this world is so complicated now. Not one person can know everything. And this is why you need other people. You need bandwidth. You need cognitive capacity. But no matter what you want to call it, to be able to look at all aspects, you're going to need to bring in other people somewhere along the line. So there are all kinds of tools today that claim that you can, do it yourself, whether it's Slack or, trees. Trees is the process and everything else. All of these have legitimacy, but remember one thing, and that's that they're tools. They are not substitutes for you and your thoughts and also your intelligence. And so, since you're going against the tide, it's going to be hard. And it's just like nature. The reason why research is so difficult is because you are going against the laws of nature. For example, vacuum packaging. Nature does not like a vacuum. Nature, once you make that vacuum package, nature will do everything possible to destroy that vacuum. It's going to try to leak in. It's going to emit atoms off of the surface. It will bring in radiation from the outside to attack it. You're going against the norm. And the same thing also goes for social. When you bring in a new idea, there's going to be resistance because people don't want to change in general. Change represents risk. Change represents disaster and implications and penalties, and therefore you have to be careful. You're going to be moving forward, and you're going to be going into hostile territory, and that means you need courage. And courage doesn't necessarily mean don't be scared. Courage basically means that yes, you are scared, but you move forward anyway because it's right. And so at the end of the day, the crux of all of this is that you need people. Nobody makes it alone, not even Dr. Cho. This is why Elon Musk said Lord of the Rings was one of his all-time favorite books, because at the nature of that book, what it's about a journey that you go on it with the right people. You're going to lose people along the way. You don't make it without your friends. And so, people are a very instrumental part of your creative process because you can't do it alone. And so, based on those tenets, this is the map. This is the map through creativity. These are the key elements in order to do something creative. First of all, to think unconventionally, you have to be a bit of a kook. Yes, people are going to think you're crazy. Yes, people are going to think you're strange. But you have to be. You have to be off the cuff. The thing is, throughout my career, I've always looked for junkyard dogs, people that people overlooked, people who don't have pedigree. There's all kinds of talent in this world. And guess what? That talent is looking for a chance to shine. And so, once I can understand and accept myself that I am a bit crazy, you have to also, besides spending time with people, spend time with yourself. Give yourself time to be within your thoughts. The thing about introverts, such as myself, we can be extroverted for a while, but it takes a lot more energy for us because we're not naturally introverted. And so sometimes we need to get back into ourselves. And everyone needs time to get back into yourself, to be you. And by being you, that helps you uh, formulate your ideas, ferment them, and let them grow out. Nobody can know it all. And that's why there are just too many dimensions. And that's why you need people. That's why you need people who can help you along. And there are times when you have to create an attitude where people feel comfortable. They have to be able to chill. And that's that when you create an atmosphere of hostility, what happens? Blockades come up, barriers come up. And then once you create barriers, people can think freely, and that doesn't create enough creativity. You have to be able to create an atmosphere where people can express themselves. One of the famous stories I tell is during a consulting job at a hospital. This old woman, and she's been there for like 40 years, and the shriveled up type who's just a janitor, a laundry woman, and this hospital had real problems. And so this hospital was asking for people's opinions and things to fix. And so this old woman said, the water is too hot. Well, everybody said, what does that woman know? Well, it was looked into. And what happened is they looked into it and found out the water heater was too high. When you sit down and think about it, a hospital uses a ton of water. And so all of a sudden, that one little errant comment ended up saving that hospital in 6 figures per year. And it's just an off-the-cuff comment. In my own patents, a lot of them came from people saying, well, maybe too bad we can't do this in nitrogen. Yeah, that was a stupid idea. I'm sorry I said it. Oh yeah, that was stupid. I'm like, wait a minute. You might have a point here. And so we looked at that point and found out, yes, nitrogen isn't a good thing because we can't get the purity and the atoms too light. But what about argon? And that led to a patent. When you form a team, though, you have to be equals. I mean, somebody's in charge. You have to acknowledge them being in charge. However, if somebody comes into the room that overshadows everyone else, then you're not equals. And if you're not equals, that creates another barrier. This is why you don't want bosses in the room or people who are higher up. Do you think the Apple people would have been comfortable when Jobs walked in the room while they're having discussions? On the other hand, Hewlett and Packard were famous for walking into meetings and just being one of the guys. This is part of the reason why Dr. Cho is so laid back. I don't believe in being a professor where I'm up here and you're all here to drink my knowledge. Now, I'm an industry guy, and I treat you just like I did with industry. But at the same time, I recognize when things get too far out of hand and things get chaotic, hand of God comes down. That's right, to bring things back into order. But you have to have equality in a team. People need to feel like they're part of the entire thing. And so our next step is, how many people should I have in these meetings? And the right number is about 5. When you get too many people than that. Now, when you get more mature in the process and all, you can start bringing in other people and you can become bigger. But that's the optimal number for a discussion. I found that really is true. Unfortunately, for this sad, sad world, not everyone has Dr. Joe's superior sense of humor. And you have to have humor. You have to find a way to lighten it because it gets heavy. And this is where culture comes in. Do you have a culture where people can joke around? And so I had one employee who, to give you an example, who would always come in and give me bad news. And I would just say, you know something, Melissa? You don't have to say anything anymore. We should just find one of those wind-up dolls. And you pull the string, and the wind-up doll will say, so what you're telling me is we're screwed. Every time bad news came up. And so we would go into meetings and we would start getting bad news, and all my people would be sitting there going like this, and people would sit around saying, "What the hell are they doing?" But this is kind of the inside humor and the levity. Once they, in a startup, they were making these buttons. And so my people started taking a Sharpie and writing on the button D less than one. And someone said, well, what does that mean? And we said, oh, that's how many data points we use to make decisions. It was all in fun. Uh, when you do your work, it can't be about money. If it's about money, then people will try to do things for the short term or for a specific objective, and that narrows what you can think about. You have to think about the journey and what it is you're trying to achieve. Granted, they give you financial incentives and things like that, but that tends to muddy the water. Yes, you should give, I believe, more in the back end, and that's like give rewards when people do well. But the problem also is you start to create a culture of mercenaries. Here's the problem with mercenaries: they're going to bag out on you the moment they get the next better deal. How do I conduct myself? There needs to be an arbiter. Somebody has to be in charge, and it's probably going to be you. You're the leader. And the approach I've always used is Socratic, and that's you have to be gentle and hard. You need to consider everything. And the reason why you need to consider everything is you don't know where the answer is. So don't be so quick to dismiss things. And so a way I found is that the way not to make people feel uh, insecure about their ideas is ask questions. When you ask a person a question and that question is not biased, then people start to think. And then if you want them to go to a certain conclusion, they go that way. And it was actually pretty funny because a team of mine once said, okay, we're going to go into this meeting and we're not going to let Steve use his Jedi mind tricks on us and make us do what we don't want to do. Are we all together? Yeah, we're all together. And I knew none of this was going on. And so I sat there and I just asked questions. I just asked questions. I just asked questions. And the next thing that happened, we came up with a consensus. And so we went out and did what we needed to do. And what ended up happening is in the hallway they went, damn it, he did it to us again. We're doing what he wanted. How does he do it? I didn't come up with the answers. They did. And so this is the challenge of you being an arbiter, to be open, but also you have to maintain a level of control. And finally, all these gadgets they have out there. There's a lot of tools. The problem is people become so involved with the tools, they forget the mission. And so that's your challenge. An example of this is that as a Geisimov came up with these ideas 50 years ago, and they still work because good concepts, conceptual thinking, those don't change. But there are loopholes. You can find exceptions to situations because this is social science. It's not nature. Now, in terms of an example, in my class, we did this is a simple example of how to use these techniques. And they were called challenge questions. And the challenge is, and I got a typo, which is say HMS Titanic. You just hit an iceberg. What do you do? And so we talked about it. Okay, first and foremost, you have to look at the nature, what I refer to as the nature of things. What is the nature of the problem you're dealing with? But before that, what's your objective? So our objective is don't die. Okay, we don't want anybody to die. And so naturally ask, okay, so how do you die? And you could die from drowning or you could die from freezing. So I asked, okay, in terms of drowning, how do you drown? And they came up with, well, you can drown due to swimming. You know, you go into the water and then you just flounder and go under. But with all the life jackets and everything else around, what's the likelihood of drowning by swimming? And they concluded it's pretty small. Because when you have a life jacket on, just lie there. And you're fine as long as you don't panic. It's damn hard to die with a life jacket on. On the other hand, someone brought up, well, what happens when the boat goes down and that vortex can pull you down with it? And so, well, how do we avoid the vortex? And they said, well, we need to get far away from the ship. Okay, so we need to find a way to get far away from the ship before it sinks. Now, the other way of dying, and people pretty much agreed amongst themselves, the freezing. And again, ask questions. So, do you think freezing is a bigger problem than drowning? A certain degree of humility helps. And so, how do you freeze? Well, you can freeze above the water, but if you have a winter coat on, then that kind of helps that. So, yes, dress warmly before we leave the boat. So, they came up with that solution. Or you can drown in the water. And the problem with the water is uh, there's not enough barrier. So, how do we avoid freezing? And then we talked about what the process of freezing is, that your body basically loses all its heat. And so the students came up with the solution: we need to find a way to insulate. Now, I could keep doing this, and we're going to have a monstrously long video. But what they came up with is talking about, okay, how do we insulate ourselves? And they brought up duct tape, but duct tape didn't come around until World War II. Still one of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind. Someone suggested wax. The problem with wax is that it's going to crack and not maintain its adhesion or its integrity. And so we kept going. And what they came up with is grease, that the channel swimmers at that time, throughout history, have always greased up their bodies to help keep the insulation and also to keep them protect themselves from the other nasties in the water. And so they came up with and then someone said, how do we make a wetsuit? Well, what do we have that's rubber? And then someone brought up, well, what about raincoats? And so now it's like grease up your whole body and put on a good winter coat and then put raincoats over you, cut them up. And then how do we seal it all together? Well, there was still tar at that time. So you have sealing material on a boat and keep layering up. And so that was the solution to Titanic. So the second part of how do we get away from the vortex? Well, make a flotation device like a bathtub. So plug up the bathtub, it insulates yourself, and voila. My students survived Titanic. And so that's the process, that they can you figure these things out and come up with an optimal solution just through talking and asking questions. And that's a Socratic process. But you have to understand essentially the nature and the things you have to deal with when you're talking about creativity.